The first time I found the login alerts on my banking app, I was sitting in my father's guest room at 11 at night, still in the same clothes I'd worn on the flight from Thunder Bay. I didn't call anyone. I didn't wake my father up to ask questions. I closed the app, set my phone face down on the nightstand, and lay there in the dark with my hands folded over my stomach, the way you learn to do after enough years of waiting for something you can't yet name. My name is Phoebe Doucet. I'm 38 years old, and for the past 6 years I've worked as a registered nurse at a fly-in nursing station in a remote First Nations community in northern Ontario. The community has no road access. You get there by a small turboprop in the summer and a ski plane in the winter, and once you're there, you are the clinic. There is no physician on site. There is no hospital within 200 kilometers. There is you, your training, and whatever supply plane arrives next week. I had been home in Hamilton for exactly 4 hours when I found the alerts. My mother, Cheryl Doucet, died when I was 24. Ovarian cancer, aggressive and fast. My father, whose name is Edward, took it the way quiet men take devastating things, by going very still for a very long time. He met Donna about 18 months later through a neighbor's dinner party. I didn't begrudge him that. Grief does strange things, and loneliness is its own particular kind of suffering. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly Donna would begin treating my life like a ledger she had the right to audit. I want to be honest about the fact that I hadn't let myself see it clearly before. When you spend 11 months of the year in a community 3 hours by air from the nearest city, it's easy to tell yourself that the distance means things are fine, that what you can't observe can't be happening. I had gotten very good at that particular form of self-deception. The night I arrived, my father picked me up from the airport with that same easy smile he's had since I was a child. The one that used to mean everything was settled, everything was safe. Donna was waiting at the house with pasta on the stove and a bottle of Niagara Riesling already open. Within 15 minutes of sitting down at the table, before I'd even finished my first glass, she asked me how my retention bonus had come in this year. I stopped chewing. I had never told Donna about my retention bonus. The remote nursing incentive from Health Canada isn't a secret exactly, but it's not something I'd ever discussed with her. I'd mentioned it to my father once, years ago, the way you mention something in passing, and that was the end of it. It's a complicated thing, I said, and changed the subject to the drive from the airport. But it didn't stop there. Over the course of that first dinner, Donna mentioned my RRSP contributions with a casualness that made my stomach tighten. She asked whether I'd been adding to my TFSA or just letting it sit. She brought up a savings account I'd opened at TD Bank in my mid-20s, one I hadn't touched in 4 years, and she described the interest it would have accumulated the way someone describes a plant they've been tending in your absence. None of these things came from guessing. They came from knowing, specific, accurate knowing that no one in that house should have had access to. My father sat across from me and cut his chicken breast into careful pieces and said nothing. Family shares, Donna said, picking up her wine glass with the comfortable air of someone stating the obvious. That's just how families work, Phoebe. What one person has, they share with the people who love them. I kept my voice even. I've spent enough years delivering bad news in a small clinic room to know how to hold my face still when my body wants to do something else. I agree with that principle, I said, but sharing usually starts with a conversation. She smiled at me the way adults smile at children who've said something slightly naive but not worth correcting outright. My father finally looked up, but only for a moment before his eyes went back to his plate. That was the first time I understood that something had been building in that house while I was far away doing a job that didn't leave room to look over my shoulder. I didn't say anything more that night. I thanked Donna for the pasta, asked my father about the garden, and excused myself early under the guise of jet lag. It wasn't entirely untrue, but what kept me awake wasn't fatigue. Back in the guest room, I looked at those login alerts again with the light off and my phone screen glowing in my hand. 4 attempts over the past 6 weeks. Different times of day. A device I'd never authorized. None of them had succeeded. I'd set up 2-factor authentication years earlier, partly out of habit and partly because a nurse I'd trained with had her identity stolen and spent 2 years untangling it. Those extra steps had held. But someone had tried 4 times. In the field, we have a principle. When you find the first sign that something is wrong, you don't panic. You assess. You gather information. You don't let the other person know that you know, because the moment they realize you're watching, they change what you're watching for. I set my phone down and decided to assess. The next morning I made myself useful around the house, helped my father with the gutters, had coffee with Donna while she talked about a renovation she'd been planning for the kitchen. I listened and nodded and asked the kinds of questions that made her feel heard. I've done intake interviews with patients in acute distress, keeping my own face neutral while listening for the thing under the thing someone is actually saying is not a skill I learned overnight. That afternoon, while Donna was at what she called her book club, though in 3 visits over 3 years I'd never once seen her carry a book, I asked my father casually if he still had the folder of my old documents he'd offered to keep when I was 25. "You're always moving," he'd said at the time. "Let me hold on to them so they're safe." I was 25 and grieving, and I said yes. He hesitated just barely before telling me it was in the lower drawer of the filing cabinet in the office. I found it exactly where he said. But it wasn't what it had been when I gave it to him. There were photocopies of documents I had no memory of copying. There was a printed bank statement from an account I'd closed in 2019, one I'd never given anyone access to. There was a sticky note in handwriting I recognized as Donna's, with what took me a moment to realize was my old transit number and institution number written out in a careful column. The way you'd write something down when you're trying to fill in a form and you don't want to forget the details. I stood in that office for a long time, the folder in my hands, the afternoon light coming through the window at a low autumn angle. Then I put the folder back exactly as I'd found it, went upstairs, opened my laptop, and I got to work. I changed every password. Not just my banking, but the recovery emails, the security questions, the phone numbers attached to every 2-factor account I had. I called TD Bank's fraud line and sat on hold for 37 minutes. When someone finally came on, I asked for a full login history going back 8 months and requested that my account be flagged for any future access attempts, regardless of how credentialed they appeared. While I was on hold, I looked at a photograph of my mother on the nightstand. My father must have put it there before I arrived, or maybe it had always lived in that room. She was laughing at something outside the frame. I couldn't remember what. I sat there looking at her and thought about what she would have said about all of this, about who had been quietly making herself at home in the architecture of my life while I was away. The representative came back with confirmation of what I'd already suspected. 3 separate attempts had passed 2 months to verify identity on my account, using information that could only have come from someone with access to my personal documents. My mother's maiden name, my childhood address, my SIN number partially. None had cleared the final security step, but they'd tried 3 times, and they'd gotten surprisingly close on the details. That evening, Donna brought up the car again. A newer SUV she'd been considering, an AWD model. Sensible for Ontario winters, she said, though it was well beyond what they'd budgeted for. She mentioned it the way people mention things they've already decided will happen, just waiting for the formality of agreement from the right person. She looked at me when she said it, not at my father, at me. "You don't have children to worry about," she said almost gently, the way someone might say something kind. "Your money doesn't really have anywhere to go." I looked at her across the table. "That's an interesting way to think about my life," I said. My father laughed a little. The nervous kind, designed to move a conversation past something uncomfortable without actually addressing it. Donna didn't laugh. She watched me with the patient expression of someone waiting to see which way a door would swing. I finished my dinner and said goodnight early. Upstairs, I lay in the dark and thought about the principle I return to in the clinic when a situation is deteriorating. Don't react before you have the full picture. Wait, watch, then act with everything you've gathered, not just what you happen to notice first. I waited. 3 days later, I was on a walking trail along the waterfront when my phone rang. TD Bank's fraud department. I slowed to a stop near the edge of the path, the lake gray and flat in the November light. Someone had called the bank that morning claiming to be me. They had correctly answered several security questions. My mother's maiden name, my first address, the name of my childhood pet. But the final verification step, the one I'd added weeks earlier, had stopped them. The bank had a recording of the call. They could send it to my registered email if I wanted. I said yes, immediately. I listened to it, standing on the trail with the wind off Lake Ontario cutting through my jacket. It was Donna's voice. Not a guess. I'd been listening to that voice at dinner tables for over a decade. She was warm, calm, explaining to the representative that she was helping her stepdaughter who travels frequently for work, that there had been some confusion with her online access, that she just needed to update the secondary contact information on the account. I walked back to my father's house. She was in the kitchen, wiping down the counter. When she looked up and saw my face, something shifted in hers, not guilt exactly, more like the expression of someone whose timing has been slightly interrupted. "I got a call from my bank," I said. "Oh," she set the cloth down with a little too much precision. "Someone called them this morning, tried to add a secondary user to my account. There's a recording." "I was trying to help," she said. "You're gone for most of the year, Phoebe. Someone needs to keep an eye on things." "Who gave you permission to call my bank?" "I'm your father's wife," she said, as if the phrase contained its own complete answer. My father came in from the hallway at that exact moment, drawn by the kind of silence that pulls people toward a room even when they don't want to be there. He looked between us and I watched him do what he always does: search for the gentlest possible exit from a moment he didn't want to be standing inside. "Now let's not," he started. "Dad," I said, "someone called my bank pretending to be me. That's not helping, that's fraud." "That's a strong word." His voice went quiet the way it does when he's uncomfortable. "It's the accurate word. There's a recording, I've heard it." Donna crossed her arms. "Do you know what remote nursing actually is?" I asked. I kept my voice level. Quiet. The way I speak to a patient's family when I need them to hear something that will cost them something to receive. My father opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "Because I don't think either of you understands what you've been trying to put your hands on," I said. And then I told them. I didn't raise my voice, I've never needed to. I told them what it actually means to work in a fly-in nursing station. No road, no backup, no physician within 200 kilometers. I told them about the January night 3 years ago, when I performed an emergency delivery in a room with failing heat and 2 propane lanterns and a radio connection to a doctor in Sioux Lookout that kept cutting out. About the boy who came in after a snowmobile accident at 40 below, and the 45 minutes I spent keeping him stable, while the medevac negotiated a landing in a whiteout. About the funerals I've attended for people I'd seen in my clinic the week before. About flying home on leave after a particularly difficult stretch and sitting in the airport in Thunder Bay and not being able to explain to anyone what I'd just come from, because there were no words that fit inside a normal conversation. "That's what that money is," I said. "It's not a bonus for showing up. It's what the government pays someone to be the only medical care available to a community of 400 people, 11 months of the year, in weather that grounds commercial flights. It's what they pay for the fact that I've missed every Christmas for 6 years. It's what they pay for the weight of what I carry that doesn't leave when I come home." The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the clock above the stove. I turned to Donna. "So when you call my bank," I said, "and you tell them you're helping your stepdaughter, I need you to understand exactly what you're trying to get your hands on, and I need you to understand that you have no right to it. Not now, not later, not when my father is gone and you've decided I have no one else to spend it on, not ever." Her composure had thinned in a way I'd never seen before. The easy confidence in her shoulders was gone. "I didn't mean any harm," she said. "The folder in the office wasn't an accident," I said. "Photocopying my documents wasn't a misunderstanding. Writing down my account numbers wasn't someone being helpful. And calling my bank pretending to be me is something that has a name in the Criminal Code of Canada, and I want you to know I've already spoken to my bank about next steps." My father's hands were trembling slightly at his sides. He stared at the floor. "Tell your wife to stop," I said, looking directly at him. "My money is mine. I earned the right to every decision about it. And no one in this house gets to override that because we happen to share a last name." Then I walked upstairs. Behind me I heard my father's, low and strained, directed at Donna. "What else have you been doing that I don't know about?" I didn't stay to hear her answer. I already suspected the shape of it. That night I called a lawyer. A woman named Carol LeBlanc who practices in Hamilton and who'd helped me draw up my will before my second contract renewal in the north. I walked her through everything: the folder, the login attempts, the recording. She was quiet for a moment on the other end of the line. "Phoebe," she said, "this isn't a family miscommunication. This is a pattern of attempted financial fraud. Patterns like this don't happen by accident and they don't happen only once." She was right. Over the next 3 days, Carol's office helped me piece together a picture I hadn't been prepared for. Donna had been intercepting mail sent to my father's address for years. Bank correspondence I'd assumed was going to my own address had occasionally been delivered there by mistake, and at least 2 pieces had been opened and resealed. On one occasion, she had submitted an inquiry to update contact information on an old investment account of mine, adding her own email as a secondary contact. The attempt had been partially blocked by the institution's verification process, but it had left a digital record. There was also a life insurance policy I'd taken out at 27. Someone had once submitted a form to add a secondary beneficiary. The insurance company had rejected it for lacking proper authorization, but the form was on file, dated and time-stamped. None of it had succeeded, but that was never really the point. The point was that it had been tried, quietly, patiently, across years, while I was 1,200 kilometers away doing work that didn't leave room to watch my back at home. I sat with Carol's documents spread across a coffee shop table and let myself feel something I'd been holding back since the night I found those first alerts. Not anger. I'd moved past the reactive edge of that by then, something closer to exhaustion. The particular kind that comes from realizing that a person who sat across from you at holiday dinners and asked how your flight was and passed you. The gravy had spent years treating your future like something she was quietly entitled to before you were even willing to admit it existed. I confronted Donna a second time, 4 days later, with my father present and Carol's documents laid out across the kitchen table. Donna looked at the papers for a long moment. When she spoke, the warmth had gone flat in her voice. "I just thought," she said slowly, "that eventually it would all come together. You don't have a family of your own, Phoebe. Eventually whatever you have saved would fold into all of this anyway. I wasn't stealing. I was planning." "You were planning with someone else's resources without their knowledge or consent," I said. "That's not planning ahead. That's appropriation." She looked at my father, waiting for him to soften the moment the way he always had before. He didn't say anything. He sat very still, staring at the insurance form on the table, the one with his daughter's name at the top and a name below it that had been filled in without her knowledge. And I watched something break in him quietly. Not dramatically. Just a small, private fracture. The kind that happens when a person finally stops looking away from something they should have looked at a long time ago. Carol's office finalized everything within the week. Every account restructured. Every old document reissued under new authorization. Every possible point of access permanently closed. I updated my will and removed any administrative link between my finances and my father's mailing address. I moved my primary banking to a different institution entirely. Donna didn't argue. I think by that point she understood there was nothing left to argue about. What surprised me more was my father's silence in the days that followed. It wasn't the same silence as before. The avoidance, the smoothing over. This was a different quality of quiet. The kind that comes from someone doing arithmetic on choices they've made over a long period of time and arriving at a sum they don't like. On the third evening after the confrontation, he knocked softly on the guest room door. He stood in the hallway looking older than he had the day he picked me up at the airport, though only 1 week had passed. "I went through our email," he said. He was holding his own laptop open to a folder he'd been reading through. Years of it. I needed to see for myself. He turned the screen toward me. There were messages from Donna to her sister stretching back nearly 5 years. My name appeared in almost every one, always in the context of money, my salary, my contract terms, my retirement savings, and then one message, dated 4 years ago, that he read aloud in a voice that caught slightly at the edges. "Phoebe will come around eventually. She doesn't have a husband, she doesn't have children. What is she saving it all for? We've given her a home base all these years. It's not unreasonable to expect something back. She'll understand that when she's older." My father closed the laptop carefully, like it had become something fragile. "I thought she cared about you," he said. "I genuinely believed that." "Maybe she did," I said. "Some version of it. But caring about someone and deciding you're entitled to what they've built aren't mutually exclusive. People manage to do both at once more often than anyone admits." He was quiet for a moment, staring at his hands. "Your mother never once asked you for anything," he said finally. "Not for money, not for help, not even when things were tight those last 2 years. She used to say the two of you were there to build each other up, not off each other." I felt something tighten in my chest. The grief I don't usually let myself sit with because there isn't room for it in a 12-bed clinic with no backup. "She would have hated this," I said. Not because of the money. Because of what it says. That the easiest way to take something from someone is to wait until they're not paying attention. My father nodded slowly. Then he said, I knew, not all of it, but every time she brought up your finances, something in me said it wasn't right, and I chose not to ask. It was easier not to. That's the part I need you to understand, I said, and I kept my voice as gentle as I could, because I could see how much the admission was costing him. It was never really about the money, Dad. It was about you choosing your own peace over telling me the truth. Every time you let something go, you were choosing comfort in your house over protecting me. He didn't argue with that. He just sat with it the way someone sits with a diagnosis they suspected was coming, but weren't ready to receive. Before he left the room, he stopped at the door. What do you need from me? He asked. Tell me and I'll do it. I don't need you to do anything for me, I said. I've already protected myself. What I need is for you to decide what kind of marriage you're willing to live inside of now that you know what's actually been happening in it. He nodded once and went down the hallway. 2 days before I left, he came to find me in the kitchen holding something I recognized immediately. A small wooden box from my mother's bedroom, the one she'd always kept her important papers in. I hadn't seen it since the year she died. I want you to take this, he said. I should have given it to you a long time ago. I think I kept it because it felt like keeping her, but it belongs with you. I took the box upstairs and opened it alone. There were photographs I hadn't seen in over a decade. There was a card my mother had written for my nursing school graduation that I'd lost in a move and assumed was gone for good, and at the bottom, folded once, a note in her handwriting. Phoebe, you're going to work hard your whole life for the things that matter to you. Don't let anyone convince you that wanting to keep what you've earned is the same as being selfish. Protecting what's yours isn't greed, it's self-respect, and you deserve it. I sat on the edge of the guest bed for a long time after reading it, the note in my hands, the lamp throwing a small yellow circle around me in the quiet room. I thought about all the ways she had known. Even then, what kind of life I was heading toward, and I thought about the particular way love sometimes works. How the people who mean it most manage to leave you exactly the tools you'll need, long before you understand what they're for. My last morning at my father's house, I came downstairs early and found him already at the kitchen table with a folder set out in front of him. Donna was nowhere in sight. I didn't ask. Everything, he said, sliding the folder across to me. Your birth certificate, your old health card. A T4 slip that ended up mixed in with some of my paperwork years ago. Anything that had your name on it that was in this house, it's all there. I went through each document. Thank you, I said. And I meant it, even knowing that gratitude and forgiveness aren't the same thing, and I wasn't prepared to spend the second one yet. I should have protected you, he said, his voice steady in a way I hadn't heard from him in years. All of it. I should have been the one asking questions instead of making it easy for someone not to answer them. I looked at him, the way you look at someone when you want to see past the version you carry in your memory. You couldn't have protected me from this, I said. I was never someone who needed protecting. What I needed was to know that you were paying attention, that when something didn't sit right with you, you'd say so even if it was inconvenient. He nodded slowly. Something settled in his face. Not peace, not yet, but the beginning of an honest reckoning, which is maybe all you can reasonably ask for. Donna came downstairs just as I was zipping my bag. She stood in the doorway, and for the first time since I'd arrived, she looked genuinely uncertain. The ease was gone entirely. Phoebe, she said, I am sorry, I don't expect you to believe that today. I turned to face her and kept my voice clear, not cold, just steady. I believe you're sorry it came to this, I said. Whether you're sorry for what you actually did is something between you and however you measure that for yourself. But I want to be clear about something, so there's no confusion going forward. I waited until she held my eyes. Forgiveness, if it comes, doesn't restore access. It doesn't restore trust. And trust isn't something you get to reclaim just because enough time has passed and the apology sounded right. I'll work through the rest on my own timeline. What you need to know is that this is closed. She nodded quietly and stepped aside. My father walked me out to my car. He carried my bag even though I told him I had it. Some habits take longer to unlearn than others, and that one I decided I could let him keep. At the car, he hugged me longer than usual. When he stepped back, his eyes were wet and he didn't bother hiding it. I love you, he said. I know that's not enough on its own. I know it's true, I said. Loving someone and paying attention to what's actually happening to them aren't always the same thing. I think we both learned that this week. I got in, started the engine, and looked at him through the window one last time. He stood at the edge of the driveway with his hands in his jacket pockets, watching me go the way he used to watch me leave for my first posting up north. Except this time I think he finally understood something he hadn't before. Not where I was going, but what I was going back to. And what it had cost me, across many years, to build a life solid enough that even the people closest to me couldn't quietly take it apart from the inside. Driving to the airport, I thought about something I say to every new nurse I help orient in their first posting in a remote community. They come in thinking the hardest part will be the isolation, the weather, the medical complexity of working without backup. The hardest part, I always tell them, is knowing what belongs to you, knowing where your edges are and who has the right to ask you to move them. Because people will try. Some of them will do it openly, and those are the easy ones to answer. Others will do it quietly, over years, in ways that look like care until you finally have a reason to look more closely. I learned that sitting at my father's kitchen table, in a house I'd trusted, from a situation I should have seen coming long before I finally did. But the thing about learning something the hard way is that you don't forget it. And you don't let it happen twice.